Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this fourth webinar, I think, that we've done in this series of features about Cin7. And this week we're going to be looking at a little known feature, I suppose, of the system, but it's really useful for those people that use consignments. So we're going to be taking a look at consignments, exploring in detail how they work, and at the end I'll be taking questions. But before I start, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Jordan, and I'm the Education and Training Coordinator here at Cin7. I spend a lot of my time training staff, training partners, and training customers like you on how to use the product and how to increase efficiencies of your business using Cin7. So I just want to quickly go over who this session is for. If you're a new customer, then this is going to be really useful for you. Maybe you're setting up the system and wondering how you're going to handle consignment stocks. If you're an existing customer, you might be looking to revise your processes, and maybe you're a new member of staff joining a company and you want to know how Cin7 works. This session will be great for you. And maybe you're an existing customer as well, that you've been working around consignment for a while, and you want to add in these additional processes to your system to make it even more efficient, and that's great. So what are we going to look for? Well, I think the chances are if you're using consignments already, then you're probably likely to know what they are, but we will go into detail about what are consignments, or certainly what our system views as a consignment. We'll then look at customer consignments, supplier consignments, and then supplier consignments, because that's the more complex of the two. I've got some tips as well for using supplier consignments that we've come across when we've been using this with our customers. And then, as I say, at the very end, we'll do a question and answer session. You're able to talk to me live if you want to, and I'll answer your questions in front of you. Otherwise, you can also submit questions down the bottom using your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get back to you, the support team maybe will get back to you if you want to submit a question without talking to me live. It's perfectly fine. And then if you have any questions after using the system, feel free to email them through as well. That's perfectly fine too. Okay, so let's have a look at the customer consignment first. So our customer consignment is when your company is giving stock to another company on condition that they will pay you once they've sold those items. So you've got you and your customer, and some of your stock is going to end up with that customer. And the important thing to know here is that the value of that stock, the ownership of that stock, still remains with you up until the point that that customer has sold that stock. So why is this important for Cin7? Well, if we're looking at your overall stock valuation in the system and you want to know the stock numbers that you have in the system, it's really important that we know how much stock is elsewhere with our customers at any one time. And then secondly, when they then go on to sell this stock, and they're going to send a purchase to you perhaps for that stock that they've sold over a period of time, we're going to be wanting to go back into Cin7, and we're going to be creating a sales order for that stock. So that is that's the customer consignment element to it. Now, a supplier consignment is the reverse of this. So instead of your stock being at the customers, this time you have your supplier stock in your warehouse, but you don't currently own that stock until the point in time that you sell it. So once you sell it, you're going to be looking to purchase that stock from your supplier. And this is important in the system because we need a way to be able to track the stock that you've got, create sales for your customers, but then make sure that we remember at the very end of a period of time to create a purchase order for our suppliers that have given that stock on consignment, and make sure we're purchasing the correct amount of items. All right, so we'll start off with customer consignments, and I'll show you how that's going to work in the system shortly. So the way that we handle customer consignments and supplier consignments in the system are completely different. For customer consignments, is fairly simple way of dealing with it. What we do is we create each consignment for our customer as a different branch. So we're going to be creating a new branch. The customer's name is going to be the name of the branch. We're going to be assigning it in the system to say that it's a consignment branch, so we can know what that branch is for. And we're going to then use branch transfers to move the stock, your existing stock, say in your warehouse, into that consignment branch. So when stock is sold, we're going to be creating a sales order using that consignment branch. And it could be that perhaps we are selling we're selling multiple items when we're selling to a customer, and we want to be using some of that consignment stock within, and we can use the distribution branch in that instance to be able to sell out of that. So I'll show you what that looks like shortly. And then using stock reports, we can see the value of the stock remaining for the customer. So if we want to know how much money do I have out in the world on consignment, we can find that out using a stock on hand report, which is pretty useful if we've got lots of consignments going on. We need to know how much stock we have in the world and what the sort of risk is, I suppose, to a certain extent for that stock. So let's pause here then, and we'll dive into the system, and we'll see what that might look like if we're creating a consignment branch. So what I'm going to do, I've logged into my system here, and I'm going to first create a branch for my consignment store. And the way that we create branches are created in the CRM, but you can't create a branch directly from the CRM module itself. To create a branch, you have to go to the settings, and you can access the settings by going to the top right hand corner of the screen over there, clicking on your username, and then clicking on settings. Once you're in the settings page, under branches, we can click on create new branch, and that's going to take us to a screen where we can start to create this new branch. The important thing is that we enter a company name in here, and the company name here, let's say, we'll say Consignment Retail Store, and that's just going to be maybe one of our customers where we're going to send some products to sit there on consignment. Now the next important thing to do is change the branch type down here, and we've got a special option here for consignment branches, and we can just choose consignment there. Now once I've done this, I don't need to do anything else here at all. So all I need to do is just click save. And that has now created a consignment branch for me. And if I go back to the CRM, I can filter my customers by branch, or my contacts rather by branch. And you can see now I've got our Consignment Retail Store as a separate branch. So the next step for creating a consignment for this retail store is to transfer some of the stock that I own to that customer. So what we're going to do is we'll pick a product that I've got stock of. Let's choose, say, the radio. Over here I've got 4 of those. And these radios, if we look at our stock on hand, we can see that they reside in the main branch. So let's say I come to an arrangement with my customer that I'm going to send them 2 radios on consignment. The way I would do that is go on the left-hand side over here, create a branch transfer. We could go stock, branch transfers, and then I'm going to create a new branch transfer for that. So click new branch transfer. And I'm going to be transferring from my main branch, which is correct. That's where all my stock resides. And I'm going to be transferring it to the Consignment Retail Store over here. And then I'm going to be choosing my product. Entering my quantity of stock transferred. And then I'm going to enter an approval date as well. So what I'm doing here is a similar process to your usual branch transfers. And I guess what usually happens for companies is that they have a process whereby they will be looking in their branch transfer module for all those transfers that need to be dispatched. And then once they've dispatched it, they'll go back in and dispatch it. And that moves the stock out of your current branch, and it puts it in a temporary holding location whilst that stock is in transit between the two places. And then the receiving branch will then go back into that branch transfer when they've received those goods, and they'll enter in the amount that they've received into that order. For my consignments, however, the important thing is that we are unable to find out whether the consignments have been received. We're sort of treating it like an order, so we're sending them out into the world to our customer, and we're assuming that they've got there. So for us, we don't need to go through that process of dispatching and completing. We could probably more than likely do it all at once. So we can enter a dispatch date here, and then we can also then enter a completed and received date, and that's going to take the stock out of our main branch, put it back into our consignment branch, and I can then go and approve that back to the list page. So what that means now is if I look at my products module again, and I look, I've still got the same amount of stock of my radio, I've still got 4 items in stock. But if I click on the stock on hand, we can see that 2 of them are now in my consignment retail store. So this is pretty useful because we're able to break down our stock, our total stock holdings, by the location of the stock. So the next thing I want to show you is how to sell that stock then. So we're assuming that, say our customer sends us at the end of each month the amount of stock that they've sold. They are going to send maybe a purchase order to us. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a purchase. We're going to create a sales order rather for that purchase that they are sending us. So we're going to click into our sales order module, create a new sales order. And the crucial point here is that we need another contact in the system for that consignment retail store that is a branch. So what we'll end up having is a branch and a customer that are completely separate from each other, but they'll have the same name. And I suppose this is to make sure that you can sell to someone, because you can't sell to a branch. So there's 2 ways to create a contact. You can either create it directly from the CRM, or you can, if it's a new contact at least, you can just enter it in to the company name. And if we can't find any matches for that name, then we'll create the contact new when you create a sales order. So it's quite a fast way of creating a sales order. And obviously you'd enter in all the details as well into the system. Now say they have they've sent you a purchase order for one of those items. What we need to do then is, and what we might need to do is just log out. So if you create a new branch and you find that you can't see it on the left-hand side, you may need to just log out and log in. Again, that kind of triggers it to update. So now I can select the consignment retail store from my branch list over here. So I've entered my consignment retail store as the customer at the top here. And my branch here is also the consignment branch that I've used to transfer the stock to. So I'm going to enter in my radio product over here, and let's assume that the customer has told me that they've sold one of those products, which is fine. I can enter in that as 1. Now the goods have already been sold, so that's fine as well. So we can enter a fully dispatched date. and we'll enter an invoice date too. So in this instance, what we've done is essentially just sold that item that the customer has told us that they've sold. And what that's going to do is it's going to mean one is remaining in their store, one of them has been sold and we can send them the invoice for that, and then the other two reside in our warehouse. Now let's assume though that this customer, in addition to purchasing that radio, they also purchase some other products from us that we're going to deliver at a later date. And so what this is going to do is going to be combining stock from two different branches. I'm going to be dispatching the stock from the main branch, which is stock that I'm going to send to them. Plus they're also purchasing some of the consignment stock that they've sold. Now you could do this in two separate purchase orders, and that might be wise just for kind of admin purposes. It might be easier to see them as two separate sales orders. But you could also do it within the same purchase order, sales order using the distribution branch function. So I'll show you how that works quickly. So what we're going to do is create a new sales order. I'm going to enter in our customer over here. And because we're selling from the main branch, we're going to enter in the product that the customer is selling, and I'm just going to pick any old product that we've got in the system. But we might also want to sell some of that consignment stock as well. So we are going to enter in the radio. Now, when you come to dispatch this order, the important thing to do is to change the distribution branch over here to Consignment Retail Store. And what this does is allows you to distribute from other branches in your system. So the red wine we're going to be distributing from our main branch, which is fine. So we can pick the main branch there and save it. But for our radio, we want to make sure we're selecting the consignment stock here. So we're going to click into this box over here, and we're going to scroll down and select the consignment stock from the option over here, and click save. And what that's going to do is it's going to receipt out those goods, one from the main branch, one from the consignment retail store, and that's going to balance out the stock for both. So that's two different ways of creating consignments for your customers and then going through a process of selling that stock to those customers. So that's the easiest of the two. I think the next thing we want to look at is supplier consignments, and these can be a little more complicated, but there is a separate module that deals with this rather nicely for us. So let me just go back to my presentation here, and we'll talk through supplier consignments. All right, so supplier consignments require a special module to be set up by Cin7, so we don't ship this by default when a new account is provisioned. So if you need to use supplier consignments, you'll need to tell the customer success person that's been dealing with you to set it up for you. Or you can ask the support team, submit a ticket, and they'll add that module in for you. So the stock in your system, because if you'll remember with a supplier consignment, we're going to have stock in our warehouse, but we don't own that stock yet. It's going to be stock that we're able to sell, but we don't own it yet. And so that stock needs to be created in our system somehow. And the way to do that is to create a consignment note. And that's done through our supplier consignment module. The next thing we need to do is once that stock has been sold on to our customer, we then can report to find out how much stock needs to be purchased. So we've sold it on to our customer now, but we also need to pay our supplier for it. We need to figure out what we've sold and what we need to purchase back from them. And I suppose in my examples, it's fairly simple to show you that because you're only dealing with one product at a time. But the value of the system really is when you've got multiple consignments, maybe multiple suppliers as well that have given you stock on consignment. That's really going to help you figure out what you need to purchase and when. And if you're able to make a precise period, so you pay for all your consignments at the end of each month, you'll see what you've sold during the course of that month for these different suppliers. And I'll show you that we can automatically create purchase orders for our different suppliers. All right, okay, so let's go back to the system and let's walk through the process of creating supplier consignments. So I have previously, yesterday, I got the support team to add it to my test account, and that can be found now underneath the purchases module over here on the left-hand side. We've got a new module now called Supplier Consignments. It looks almost identical to every other sort of purchase or sale that you make, every transaction that you make in the system. It's exactly the same. You've got your filters up the top here, you've got a list underneath, and you've got the ability to create new transactions. What I've also done in the products module is I've created a product called Consignment Product. So this is the product that I'm buying from my supplier, or I'm receiving from my supplier at least. It's going to reside in my warehouse for a little while until I've sold it on. And the consignment product is what I'm going to use as an example. And just remember that I've got 9 in stock here. So when we come back to look at it shortly, we'll see it rise from that 9 figure. All right, let's create a new supplier consignment. Then I'm going to use that same product. I'm going to purchase it from a supplier called Consignment Stock Supplier. And I've preset that supplier up in my system. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to enter in a consignment stock product. So that's that product that I have 9 of, if you'll remember. So it could be that I pause here. So I've entered the products in. I can even enter in a requirement date up the top here, today. And then it could be that at this point I send it to my supplier to say I'd like to buy or I'd like to receive these amount of goods on consignment. For the purposes of the demo, though, I'm going to plow on and assume that process has been done and maybe those products have been received into my warehouse. So what we want to do is we can enter in a fully received date as well. And we're just going to change the quantity. We'll go to 10. Why not? We're going to fully receive those items in. So that means that we have received 10 of those items into our stock on consignment. And one other thing, so the main branch, I'm using the main branch here for the time being. Let's approve this and back to list. So now that I've fully received it, if we go to our products module and I can refresh, just like a purchase order, when you enter a transaction for it, it's going to increase the amount of product that you've received for it. So instead of 9 now, it's showing that we've got 19 and we've received those products on consignment. So we can see their notional value there of $5, but we don't actually own that stock. So it doesn't form part of our total stock valuation at this point in time. The other thing to note here is that because we've received it with the consignment note, it's got the SCON over here for supplier consignment. It's just noting that we've received it in that transaction that's a supplier consignment. So that's pretty easy so far. The only thing to mention is that if you do a stock valuation report, then that value of that product is going to be included in your stock valuation report. So at this point, what we might want to do is create a category for our consignment product. And we can then exclude our consignment products from our stock valuation report so that when we're looking at our accounts and reconciling between Cin7 and our accounts, we can exclude the consignment stock that we have on hand, and there's two stock values, total stock values should balance. And while we're talking about accounting, I suppose, because we don't import supplier consignments into our accounting software, so QuickBooks Online 0, that's not going to affect the stock valuation in our accounting software as it should, because we don't want our stock that we don't own yet to form part of our stock valuation. So because supplier consignments are done separately from purchases, it's not going to increase the stock value in our accounting software until we create a purchase for that stock. And that's what I want to show you now. So let's assume then that some time passes and we want to create a sale for that stock. So we're going to sell some of this consignment stock to our usual customer. And we're just going to process it as we would do any other sales order. So we'll enter in the product down the bottom here. Consignment product. And I'm just going to dispatch this and invoice it at the same time as well. So we've sent our consignment stock, the stock that we don't own, out to our customer. And if we go back to our products, we'll see that the stock has been reduced. But as the stock was on consignment, that's not quite the end of the story for this. What we need to do then is we need to then go on and purchase that stock from our supplier. So the way to do this, and the way that we'd recommend, is to pick a period of time in which you want to purchase your consignment stock from your suppliers. And I think it's fairly usual for people to do this at the end of each month or the end of each quarter, perhaps. And there is a special report in Cin7 for doing this. So what we can do, we go on the left-hand side, we go under Stock, Admin and Reports, and we go to Standard Reports. We're going to find a particular report that's related to consignments. And you can see over here, it's added down the bottom here. Supplier consignment by dispatch date. So we want to look at all of the products that were on consignment and that were dispatched between now and the previous month. And so we can use the date filters up here to filter for that period of time. So the system doesn't automatically know what period of time you're looking at. So this is probably a crucial thing to do. You want to make sure that you're filtering the report by the last period of time so up until the end of the last time that you did the report, essentially. So you're making sure that you're always catching all of those new sales for consignment stock with your report. So you can see here this report is just reporting on the last month. And you can see that some sales have happened of my consignment stock. I've had 2 items sold of this consignment over here, and also some white wine, which we had on consignment, has been sold. Because they're from 2 different suppliers, I want to only create a purchase order for one supplier at a time. So I'm going to use the supplier drop down here to filter the supplier that I'm going to use. So my consignment stock supplier, click OK. And then what I want to do then is create a purchase order for these 2 items remaining. Now the good thing about this report is that we don't need to print this off in order to create that purchase order. We can create a purchase order directly from this report. And this purchase order will be created with the quantities determined by the amount in this field here, to order. And if we want to edit the quantities as well, we can in this report. So if you want to change the quantities for whatever reason over here, we can enter that in. So the next thing to do, if I want to create a purchase, we can search for our supplier up the top here in this field up here. And you can see once I start typing, I get the suggestion over here. I can choose that. And then once I'm happy with the quantities in the report, the products that I'm going to be purchasing, I can then click New Purchase Order to bring up a new purchase order. You can see that the supplier has been brought through over here. This is the supplier that I've chosen. And if we scroll down as well, we've got the 2 products that I wanted to purchase. So I can approve this in back to list, and then I can send this off to my supplier. And then at some point in time, what I want to do is I want to complete this order. But this is a really important point. When we fully receive the purchase order, we don't want to bring back more stock into the system. We've already sold those goods. So we're just simply purchasing stock that has been moved out of our system. So you'll notice here, when I've entered a fully received date, the quantity received hasn't increased. And the important thing is, especially if you're doing it line item by line item, you want to make sure that you don't get the quantity of 2 in here, meaning that 2 items are going to come back into your system, because that would mean then you've got double of the product that you should have had. We want to make sure that we're fully receiving it to close off that purchase order now and importing it into our accounting program. But we want to make sure that we're not using it also to bring stock into the system. So just keep your wits about you when you're doing purchases for consignments. You want to make sure that the stock levels are not going to be increasing. We'll enter an invoice date and a supplier invoice number up here. And we're going to click Save and back to list. And so what that will have done, if we look at our products, our stock on hand is reduced by correctly, but then we've purchased some more back in. I think what happened was, because I sold 1, but then I went into the report and it showed me 2, it's because I'd been testing it out earlier today. So that's the reason why I bought 2, but I only sold 1. So if you're doing your report, filtering it correctly by date, the quantities in the report should match exactly what you sold over that period of time. And that maybe highlights why it's important to filter it by date correctly, because as you can see, because I'd already sold something today, it was counting that sale as well. So once you've sold all the products in your supplier consignment, you can then go back into your supplier consignment over here, and you can click into here. And then once you've fully completed this supplier consignment, you can enter a completed date over here, and that removes that consignment from the system. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the tips that I recommend, and I'll explain each one in some detail. So the first thing we've already covered, so we want to categorize your consignment products for accounting purposes, so that the value of the consignment stock that you have, the stock that you don't own, in Cin7 forms part of your total stock value. But as we've discussed before, it's not going to increase the stock in your accounting software because of that separation from purchases. However, once I import the purchase order into my system, then the stock is going to increase, but as your cost of goods sold is going to be removed shortly after, that value is not going to change. So remember to filter the report that you use at the end for your supply consignments by date and then supplier, and that makes sure that you are not double counting anything, and you have to be quite methodical about the way that you do that. And then you're going to filter by supplier to make sure that you're only creating purchase orders for one supplier at a time. So remember that purchase orders should not be received in, so that's really important. We're not going to be bringing stock into the system when we're purchasing back that consignment stock. So the next point, and this is quite an important point, is that branch transfers can make things difficult. So what we need to remember then is that if we're getting consignment stock into our warehouse and then we're moving that stock from the warehouse to another store, we're not going to be able to tell where that stock came from. So this is fine if you only ever purchase that stock, for instance, that consignment stock product on consignment, because we know when you're selling it, you're selling the consignment stock only. But we have come across examples of customers where they have both consignment stock of one product plus stock that they actually own, and that's all included within the same product. And in that situation, we need to be really careful about how we do it, and I'll show you an example then. So say I was to purchase some consignment as well. Let's have a look. So what I've done is I've purchased some consignment stock as well. So there's a there's a distinction there between some stock that I actually own and I've paid for, and some of the stock that I only have on consignment, so I don't own yet. And if we go back to our products, we can see that distinction over here by clicking on our stock on hand. And we can see that because these were bought on a purchase order, we own that product. But because these were bought on a consignment note, those products we don't own yet and we need to purchase once they're sold. So what does that mean then in a sales order? Well, it doesn't mean too much other than we need to be careful when we're dispatching the goods where that stock is coming from. So let's have a look like this. So we're selling one of these products, but what product are we selling? Are we going to use the one that we've purchased and that we own, or are we going to use the ones that are on consignment? And I guess how you deal with that is up to you, and how you separate those consignment products from your purchase products is up to you. And I suspect if you do have this problem, then you'll probably have figured out a fairly good way of splitting that stock anyway, just for your own purposes. But it's important to remember that we are remembering to dispatch the correct stock. But as I said, if we do then the branch transfer for this, the stock reference is going to be overwritten with the transfer reference. So we'll be able to see the stock, but all we can tell is that it's from a transfer. So there's two ways to deal with this. So if we've transferred some of the stock, what we could do is create a separate branch for our supplier consignment stock. And that way, there's a clear distinction between the stock that we own and the stock which is in a separate branch entirely in the system that is consignment stock. And that's quite a tidy way of doing it. It's the way that the support team recommended to me that we do it. And if you do it that way, then yeah, there's a clear distinction between the two. And we know that if we're selling consignment stock, we're going to need to use our distribution branch function. We're going to bring in that additional branch into the transaction, and then we're going to be choosing the consignment branch from that. Even though in the reference it's going to show branch transfer because I've transferred that stock. The other way is to use the system to follow back the transaction reference. So you could click on the transaction reference, it will take you to the branch transfer, and then you could check whether those products in that branch transfer were from a consignment or from a purchase. Although I would say that that's probably quite a difficult way to do it, quite a complex way, but it may work maybe for your particular process. So as I said, be careful if you receive consignment and non-consignment stock of the same item. I think using a branch to distinguish between the two is probably the best way to do that if you're in that situation. And then finally, we want to deal with returning consignment items in separate ways. So what you don't want to do if you decide that you're going to return some consignment stock to the customer is create a negative adjustment for that stock. Reason being, if you import that negative adjustment to your accounting program, that's going to remove some of the stock value, of stock that you never actually owned in the first place. So using an adjustment is probably not the best way to do it. Also, using a credit note is not great either, because if you're using a credit note, it's going to also return some value to our accounting program that we never actually technically owned. So the only real way to do it is to use a supplier consignment note, but you can enter in negative amounts into your supplier consignment to remove stock from the system. And all that's going to do is it's going to remove stock from the system that you never really owned. And if you can complete it, then it's going to sort of tidy that all up for you. So an important thing there is just be wary when you're moving stock out of the system. Make sure that you are thinking always about the accounting side of the equation. There's always the stock in Cin7, but there's always the Xero or the QuickBooks side of things that we need to consider as well. And we just want to make sure that everything is doing as it should be on both sides. Finally, I think the important thing to do is when you do a stock take as well, you're going to be discounting that consignment stock from the stock takes that you're doing, because you don't want to be creating an adjustment when you do a stock take for those additional items. So just make sure that when you do a stock take, you're separating the consignment stock items in your warehouse, maybe even keep it in a separate location, and you make sure that you're not adjusting products into the system that you haven't yet purchased. So that's pretty much it. I know supplier consignments can be fairly confusing. The good thing is if you're signed up to this webinar, you'll be able to receive this video by email shortly afterwards. And you'll be able to review what we've just been through. But if you do have any questions, I can take some questions now. What I'll ask you to do is just put your hand up using the GoToWebinar control panel. And if you do, I'll talk to you here. Otherwise, what I could do, if it's specific to your business and you don't want to talk over the line, that's cool. We can deal with that after through the support team. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we've got any takers to come online, but that's fine. I can see that I've got a few questions in my questions box down here. So I will I'll go back and with a couple of my colleagues, we'll just answer those in more detail. All right, thanks very much for coming, and I think we're going to do the same thing again next week. So we'll notify you of that soon, and yeah, we'll see you then. Thanks very much.